It's very appropriate. They would do that in the real world. Very normal adolescent behavior. We can, at this point, start to expect that. Can't expect a 14-year-old necessarily to confront a 16-year-old, but that's an appropriate expectation. I also think since peer group is so important, we need to understand that, use that in our, build on that, make small group, peer group, connection types of things part of the treatment process. It works real well. They love to do group at this point. The influence of the kids, their peer group influence, the peer group value system intensifies. Adult influence, adult value systems tend to take a back seat. Most of the kids still kind of hang out with a core group of kids who are kind of their same sex, and then they have larger there's parts of their subgroups of larger groups that tend to be mixed sexes. The interesting thing is that is why at this age group what is appropriate developmentally is the dating process, particularly like group dating process where you go somewhere with all your friends and you hook up. In the 90s, kids don't date. I don't know if you guys have, they don't date anymore. Kids never, it's just a real rare, a date is like going to the prom, they hook up, they hang out, they hang in large groups. I think that it'd be very appropriate if they would date because they don't date, they don't even really have relationships. They may be sexually active with one another, but they're not even really boyfriend and girlfriend. They have a lot of what we call undefined relationships, which is another thing that causes some anxiety and confusion. The kids never really know what is this relationship all about. The good thing about kids at this age is that the most pathological person doesn't rule anymore. It's such a relief. The most pathological person, the kids look at him and go, "You're weird," quit trying to act so tough. You're just trying to act tough. You're trying to act bad. Because what has happened generally is whoever the bad person was in middle school, the tough bad that everybody looked up to, he doesn't change. He doesn't mature. He doesn't grow up. So they get into older, middle adolescence, they get into high school, and people are like, "Oh, that's so junior high. What are you acting like that for?" So, and I use this line with my kids all the time. Since my kids have been using drugs since they were 11, this is how they deal with peer pressure. They go, "Been there, done that. That is so junior high." And that's how they tell people they don't want to use drugs anymore. They kind of do it from this stance of, I did that when I was in middle school. I'm in high school now. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm on to bigger and better things. It's a way that allows them to use that status, that age thing, that maturity thing to their advantage with their recovery process. Emotional development at this particular age group. Increased internal controls. Kids really start to understand just through life experiences, okay, feelings come and go. Just because you feel bad doesn't mean you're going to feel bad forever. Just because you feel bad doesn't mean you need to necessarily act on that immediately. I can kind of put a hold on this. I know that I'll feel better in a little while. So they really are able to kind of ride the storm, feel like that they have some control. They don't have to behaviorally react to everything that they feel going on in their gut. And that's real important for them because when kids start to feel like they have a little bit more control over their emotions, they start to feel better about themselves. Kids who continue to react and respond to their emotions and feel like they don't have any breaks never feel good about themselves. Kids who are overly impulsive, overly reactive, constantly responding to things in anger, they feel out of control. And it's a very scary thought to feel like you don't have control over your thoughts or your feelings. Very scary kind of experience for them. So one of the things that's tied to self-esteem for kids is to be able to have feelings and not always react on them. And when kids do that, we need to point that out for them so that they recognize and feel good about an area of competence. That's a huge mastery emotionally for kids. If kids move into middle adolescence and continue to have those real extreme fluctuations in their feelings and their emotions, we need to take a look at that and try and figure out what's going on with them. They kind of get concerned at this phase about trying to figure out on their own what's right and wrong. Middle school kids, we impact their values because they'll listen to us. Young adolescents. Middle adolescents, they themselves are already in the realm of thinking about fairness and unfairness and hypocrisy. I always think it's funny that they can't remember what you asked them to do last week or yesterday. Where's your assignment? Oh, I forgot. But if you ever say anything that contradicts yourself, they remember. You can say, 3 days ago or 3 years ago you said something totally contradicts what you're saying now. And that's because of that concept of fairness and not fair and justice and what's right and all that, they get real obsessed with hypocrisy and inconsistency. And that's why you can't get away with anything with them. They got their little antennas up watching you because they're devaluing you anyway. Okay? So they're watching you for you to make a mistake. And you cannot be inconsistent with them. That is why you guys know this. You can't bullshit them because they are watching you and they're just waiting for you to slip up and they're just waiting for you to say something that even remotely sounds inconsistent so they can say, aha, you're a phony. See, that whole, they're really almost obsessed with hypocrisy at this age. They talk about it. Don't take it personal, okay? It's just part of that, once more, that emotional development, that cognitive development, really aware of that. On the other side of that, I respect adolescents, because adolescents weed out bad counselors real quickly. Because if they get this sense about you, you're done. Your history. They're not talking to you anymore. I laugh because I've known adults who go to bad therapists for 15 or 20 years because they don't realize that they're bad. But at adolescents, they won't put up with that. They weed us out, okay? And they eat us for lunch. They mess with us. They play with it. But you know, the thing about that that's so wonderful is that it's because they're really watching you to see if you're consistent. That if you're talking to them about recovery, are you displaying recovery behavior? If you're talking to them about values, are you role modeling value-based behaviors? One of the things that works best with kids this age, as opposed to like preaching to them, and you better do this, and you better do that, and I'm telling you, you'd be sorry if you don't do that, and you'll learn, you'll get a consequence. One of the best things is to explain why you do what you do. You know, well, here's what I do. You know, I don't like to be rushed around being in a big old frenzy in the morning. It starts my day off wrong. So I like to organize myself, but that's just me. That's how you model for them, is you explain your behavior to them. You know, I don't like it when I get mad. I yell and scream, say stupid things, look like a lunatic. I don't like it. So I really just kind of take a couple deep breaths when I get mad. Now, they'll listen to that, and if they see that you're consistent with that, that you really do that, that's how you have more impact on them. They don't need you in your face preaching to them about them. Okay, and that doesn't work real well with them. But to use yourself as a role model, particularly in, you know, just in watching what you're doing, but also explaining your behavior, they tend to like that. They like that a lot better. Role modeling for kids at this point, values. Okay, letting the kids talk about what they need to in terms of what seems fair to them and what does not seem fair. Recognizing and understanding that they do need to look at that whole concept of hypocrisy. And impulsivity. Now, if kids are emotionally impulsive at this age, one of the best things we can do for them is to teach them impulse control skills. It will help them feel better about themselves. It will help them feel competent. It will increase their self-esteem. They need to know that at that point. Academic development, academic functioning. Kids at this age really start to kind of think, what am I supposed to be doing after high school? Some interesting research. If kids go into the junior year of high school knowing or understanding a little bit about what they want to do after high school, they're much better students. Throughout early adolescence, kids question the relevance of school in relationship to the real world. And they do that throughout middle adolescence. They say, what does algebra have to do with life? What does this have to do with that? Now, I always explain it from a value point of view. I say algebra has nothing to do with life. Thank God, because I flunked it 3 times. But I'll tell you what does have to do with life. Going to classes that you hate, doing your homework that you don't understand, meeting deadlines that interfere with your life, that has to do with life. So if you never learn your algebra, if you learn those things in algebra, that's good. And they need that. I try and teach them relevance in relationship to values. Those are all value-based types of behavior. But they go through that whole process of, well, how come and why and what's this got to do with anything? If they can understand, gee, this is really what I want to do, that gives me something to work towards. We accidentally found this out one time. I was running a program, and we had a slot on Friday afternoon, and we didn't know what to do with it. So what we'll do is we'll bring people from the community in to talk to our kids about careers. Now, if you talk to kids, I think there are 3 or 4 careers that you can have. Okay, you can be a teacher. You can sell drugs. You can work at McDonald's. You can be probably a counselor, because they know lots of those. You know, or you can like maybe be an attorney. But in their mind, there's only 3. They don't think that there's millions of careers. Some of those require college, and some do not. And one of the things that we found is our kids just loved talking, and they never realized all these. You know, we did a thing on just healthcare, and we had all these people come in and just talk briefly, 15, 20 minutes about what they did. They didn't know that people were out there doing that. They loved that. One of the best things that we can do with kids at this phase is trying to get some basic career assessment interest scales done with them to try and move them forward so they'll see some relevance. We always want them to go to school, and we want them to go to school because we think a high school diploma is what, you know, is kind of a measurement, an outcome measurement, but they have to know, what am I working towards? So anything that you can do, even exposing them to a variety of different types of things that you can actually do. The other thing is our kids are so trained that either, number one, our kids really believe this. If you're not going to go to college, why even go to school? It's like either college or you drop out of high school. I mean, it's like there's no in-between. And if we can help our kids see that there is an in-between, There really are things that you can do that you don't have to go to college for, that you need a high school diploma for. I think that would make high school more relevant. But I think as a culture, we've kind of trained our kids, well, if you don't go to college, life is over. You might as well drop out of school in the 6th grade. Because that's how my kids view it. Your kids view it that way. I wonder where they got that. From us. Just culturally, everything that we've told them. So focusing academically, if we want to make it relevant with kids here, focusing them on what are some interests, what are some things that they can do. Work from a value perspective on the validity of school in relationship to the real world. Once again, they love at this point to question, debate, question school policy. All you have to do is pick up a high school paper, and they're always questioning some policy. I always like it. We have this great school in our system, and what they do is, because they listened to me for years, and I kept saying, why do you kick kids who don't want to go to school out because they're truant? It makes no sense. So they send the kids to a detention center, a local detention center. And of course the kids hate it. That's miserable. And so they did this whole article about how kids really hated that. And I was laughing going, that's the point. You know, how it's so much better just to kick the kids, suspend them, let them go home so they can smoke dope or whatever. But they always have to have strong opinions about everything. You know, and that's what they do in school papers. If you look at the school papers, those are the little rebels. They got their little opinions about everything. They have an opportunity to express that. Do we in our environments give them a place to express strong opinions? Are strong opinions that they would normally express in a school paper going to get them in trouble with us? That's that emergence of independent thought, that practicing independent thought. They need an opportunity to kind of get into some of those ways of thinking. Once again, it just makes them feel like they're so smart. Now we're going to talk about wrapping up, winding down the whole adolescent process, and then we're going to talk about what happens in the process of kids who are using substances. 17, kids generally, if they're right on target with their development, kind of enter late adolescence around 17. We'd like to think they finish at about 20, but adolescence is done when this stuff is done. You know, really, there's not an age. So adolescents get done when people are able to accomplish the tasks that are set forth for them. And so our kids are telling us by virtue of the fact that it's taking them longer to graduate from college, that they're taking time off before they go to college, that they're getting kicked out their first semesters, things like that. Our kids in our culture are telling us that they're not getting those tasks done. And they're failing because we're putting them in worlds where we expect all of a sudden, because historically you've been able to accomplish those tasks earlier, our kids pretty much, they're telling us 22, 23 when they're working on those tasks. And some of you have kids that age, you probably kind of lived through this firsthand. Let's talk about what it is we expect. We really want them to have refined their thinking skills. And part of their thinking skills being refined is just that they've had life experiences that have contradicted their personal fables, life experiences where they learn from mistakes. I love 17 and 18-year-old kids because they love to talk about how wise they are. You know, they thought, when I was a kid, when I was in middle school, I thought, but now I know different. Now I know better. And that's because if the process has worked, they really are wiser because they've lived through, you know, a lot. And if you think about in the process of adolescent development, 6 months is a long time. Why? Because their adolescence lasts for a relatively short period of time. So if you think about that, living through adolescence, having 4 years of adolescence under their belt should account for a great deal of wisdom. They learn a lot in that short period of time. Things have changed from them from the time they were 14 to 17. If they're on task, completely different kids. Completely different kids. Very, very, and they feel different, and they feel wiser, and they should feel that way. So we really kind of look at this point of them kind of refining some of their language skills, refining some of their thinking skills, being able to think and talk more abstractly. They should be able, at this point, we expect them to have language skills so they can express what's going on with them with a certain amount of ease. There are kids that are wonderful at that. There are kids who probably never develop that. There are kids, I compliment some of my kids, my really good, slick, good talkers. I tell them they're word smart. Okay? Because I have a lot of 17-year-old kids who probably talk better than they think, who they really are. They're just like, you know, you knew them when they were 13, they could hardly express themselves, and now they're 17 and they're expressing all kinds of stuff, you know, and for whatever reasons to manipulate, to con people, but they're real good. They're word smart. They know how to use their words. So they should be able to do that. Physical development, kids at this age should experience comfort with their bodies. I mean, that is really a task of, okay, my body has changed. I know how to control it physically. I know how to make it do what I want it to do. It looks like it fits together. It looks like it kind of works together. Something that we don't like that generally happens is the young kids wear baggy clothes to hide it. By the time they're 17, they kind of like it, okay? So they start to show it off. Okay, then all of a sudden they start wearing skimpy clothes and they like run around showing it off. And everybody gets horrified by that. And I'm kind of laughing that if they've really done what they needed to do in terms of understanding their body, feeling like they've taken control of it, understanding the changes that have happened, that is the next step that they kind of get around. They go from wearing like the really baggy clothes to the real short shorts. And everyone hates that. But that's what's going on with that is they finally feel like, okay, I'm comfortable with this. We have so many things that stop the development of, particularly with the females, of them being comfortable with their bodies, that they continue forever and ever. And I really believe this. Women who have eating disorders have a 13-year-old's vision of that discomfort with their body. They never become, for whatever reason, comfortable with it. They've had sexual trauma that stops them from becoming comfortable with it. And we see that even though the physical development has happened, the changes have occurred, the kids have never, they're not okay with it. So that's really something I watch for in terms of when I have 17 and 18-year-olds, are they all right with that? They should be all right with that. They should feel like it is their body. They have mastery over it. They understand the changes. They know how it works. Those types of things. They also, at this point, most kids have had some type of physical, sexual contact. They really do kind of at this age look for how do you handle your sexuality appropriately? How do you handle being with the opposite sex appropriately? Some level of comfort with not being really uncomfortable if I'm a male being around females, if I'm a female not being real uncomfortable around males, understanding more of a person which lays the groundwork for the next phase of development, and that is until you have done some of this stuff, you're not really ready for true intimacy. You're not really ready or available for relationships with other people. And the very simplest way to explain that is that if you're really going to have a relationship with other people, you have to have moved beyond your narcissism and recognize that there are two people involved in this, and that it requires a great deal of personal growth to be aware of the fact that, geez, I'm not the only one in this relationship. Adolescents are very narcissistic early on and through middle adolescence in their relationship kinds of concepts. And this is how I kind of break this down. When people are, in their early 20s, for example, it takes them to be in about their early 20s, they recognize, gee, I'm not the only one having sex here. There are two of us involved. And that's really how it is, that it's a relationship concept. It's back and forth. There's not just one of us. And until they've done this, they cannot do relationships, which is why we shudder when we think about these kids thinking they're going to get married, thinking they're going to spend their lifetimes with people, when they don't even know, they haven't even done their basic individual work with themselves. What else with physical development? Family roles. This is what's nice if you're a parent. All of a sudden you get kind of smart again. That kids they continue their separation. Then at one point, and it depends on where they're at and depends on, like if they go away to college, they decide that kids look back and they try and make peace. It's inherent in them that they need to go back and make peace with their family. What does that mean for our kids? Several things. Number one is, why do our kids, who are 17, 18 years old, we're going to give them a great living environment, okay, a great foster home, a great independent living, and they go back to their crazy family. They can sit there and tell you that family is crazy and know that's family. Why do they go back? Because they're inherently driven to go back to make peace. I don't care how bad or crazy they think that family is. It's an inherent need of our kids to go back and make peace. We do not help them in that process when we say to them, you better stay away from those people. Our job is to figure out how can they make peace so that they can move on. That's our job. To tell them not to try and make peace doesn't work. It's a natural process. So our job is to figure out what's a safe way for this kid to make peace. Is the family available for the kid to make peace? If the family's not available for the kid to make peace, what do we do? And this is how kids make peace. They hardly ever say, gee, I'm sorry, I've been a little shithead. I'll be nicer from now on. They make peace like this way. If they know that it drives their mom nuts if they wear their earring, they take their earring out when they go to mom's house. They ask their parents for advice whether they want it or not because they know it makes their parents feel good. They don't ever, and most of us can remember making peace at one point where we called back, and just said, hi, Mom, just wondering how you were. I probably put you through quite a bit. Well, bye. All of a sudden you're being nice to them. You ask them for advice. You never, ever before asked them for advice. Didn't care about anything they had to say. So people need in their own way to make peace. And we know this. If you don't make peace, you cannot re-engage as an adult with a family of your own. We have people who over and over and over replay that separation dynamic that happened with their family in multiple relationships before they finally get it. It's that need to make peace. So they have to go back. And the crazier the family, okay, the more traumatic the adolescence, the more powerful the need to make peace. And that is probably, of all the things that they need to do, the thing they need to do most at this age. And I'm not saying they have to do it when they're 17, but I'm saying they can't get done with adolescence until they've been able to do that. You know, kind of the traditional get an apartment, go to college provides a background for that to happen. What happens with kids in the 90s is they try and make peace. You know, okay, 18, they'd be nice for a couple weeks or a couple months, go away to college, and there's a distance and they can live with that in a peaceful way. Then all of a sudden something happens, they have to go back home. And the peacemaking process gets all disrupted because parents set rules. They think parents shouldn't have rules. And so the process gets disruptive. In the 90s, we hadn't figured out how to negotiate the peacemaking phase because you can't, like, make peace with them and live with them. I mean, you got to make peace with them and get them out of there, you know, get them on with their life because it's just difficult to live in a peaceful state. You know that if you guys are married, you know. So it's kind of a challenge in the 90s for how we're going to help our kids do that. They do things like they tend to not fight. You know, they don't throw things in their parents' face. They just shrug off conflict. So that whole conflict with parents tends to decrease, and it will do it eventually. If it doesn't do it when they're 17, it'll do it when they're 19. It's a very, you know, part of the process. They practice leaving home. They leave for extended periods of time. Kids at this age are much more capable of making independent judgments with their friends. This is, if I have a mature, you know, a kid who's 18, and he really is 18, he functions like an 18-year-old, and he tells me, you know, I really can, not all the time, but I can be with my friends who I know who are users, and it doesn't bother me to stand up to them, and they don't try and pressure me. He's probably telling you the truth. But kids at this age are much more like, we don't all have to do the same thing to be friends. I can be your friend, and you can do this, and I can do that, and that's cool. And, you know, I don't have to talk to you about that. That's normal. So when a kid that age tells you that, he may very well be telling you the truth. That is normal if he's really developmentally on target. Versus a 14-year-old who tells you that, he's not going to be able to do that. So recognizing they really are able to make a little more independent judgment at that phase. Social development, they really start to try and look for some kind of consistency and permanence. And I don't mean permanence like married, but that whole thing about dating somebody every other week and changing constantly, you know, changes. And they really start to have relationships that last 6 months, a year, that type of thing. That shows a great deal of maturity. I had an 18-year-old heavy pot smoker, and I really knew he was developmentally delayed because he told me that his girlfriend was gone. He was going to have to get a new girlfriend because she was gone. I thought like she moved or something. She was gone to camp, and she was going to be gone for 3 weeks. And so he didn't want to not have a girlfriend for 3 weeks, so he got another girlfriend. Now, that's what a 14-year-old does. Okay? 18-year-old kids don't do that. And so then I'm going, well, I foresee with my crystal ball, because I'm so wise, a little bit of a problem when your girlfriend comes home. So he's like, no, it's no big deal. So then, of course, his girl, he calls me, you'll never guess what? You're having a problem because now you have 2 girlfriends. Yeah, what am I going to do? You know, so that's real immature thinking for an 18-year-old. That my girlfriend's going to be gone for 3 weeks. Got to get another girlfriend. A normal, healthy 18-year-old could say, okay, 3 weeks, but you know, I mean, that's not the end of things. We'll be here when she comes back. Social development. The key to social development is just a lot less narcissism. They realize that the world is not centering around them. They realize that everybody's not looking at them, focused on them, thinking about them constantly, talking about them. This is my story of when I realized my younger sister grew up. When my younger sister was 14, she was in a beauty contest. And I went down to see the contest, and everyone goes, she's just been crazy. Go in her room and talk to her. And I went in there, and I'm like, honey, are you about ready? And she's like, I'm not going. And I go, now, why aren't you going? And she put her hair in a French braid, and she goes, see this piece of hair? It's sticking out. I go, yes. She goes, everyone will be looking at me and laughing at me. And I said, Slight logic and reason, which is stupid to use with 14-year-olds. But I said, well, honey, you know, you're only going to have your hair like this for the opening number, right? Yes. And you're going to be doing a dance number, right? Yes. And you're going to be on stage with 30 other girls, right? Yes. And all their parents are there, and they're sitting a long way. What is your point? You know, it didn't work at all. So I said, look, I paid that dress. I hauled my ass down here. You're going to go to that beauty contest. And everybody said, that was good. That was a good adolescent work, Janice. I'm glad you're the expert on that. So, no, could I convince her? I mean, she knew that everybody was going to be looking at her little hair sticking out, laughing at her, pointing their fingers, taking pictures, and sending it all over the world. And that's like that real narcissistic preoccupation. She's 18. She's also in a beauty contest. She's doing these because she keeps getting scholarship money, which is fine with me because I don't want to pay for her to go to college. So she keeps going to the beauty contest because every year she gets scholarship money. So she's doing it, and I'm like, well, honey, you know, we got to go. Like 15 minutes. She's like, I'm just going to toss my hair and throw on some makeup. It's no big deal. She goes, yeah, they're looking at, there's 30 other kids on stage anyway. So it's the difference between that real, I'm so preoccupied with myself, and everybody else is preoccupied with me. We always used to laugh that I have a sister who's a year older, and I always used to laugh, and I always tell her that I use her as an example. There'd be like 5 or 6 of us girls, and anytime anybody would whistle, she goes, oh, it just makes me so mad. Those boys are always whistling at me. And it was like, there's a possibility that they could have been whistling at no, it never occurred to her ever. And she to this day goes, well, I don't know why you think they'd be whistling at you, you know. So she always had that kind of thing that they were whistling at her, you know. And I know it's because she had boobs and I didn't, but nonetheless, she was real narcissistic with that. Whereas when you're older, you realize, okay, well, you know, there's many of us here. It could have to do with many of us. What does that mean in terms of authority relationships, okay? What that means when they're younger, you say, okay, guys, let's go, we're running late. And the 14-year-old says, he's always picking on me, pointing me out because he thinks you're talking to you. If you say to a 17-year-old, okay, guys, let's go, they're late, they go, okay, guys, let's go, we're late. That they're much more, they're just not so much like they're focused on me, you're picking on me, everybody's thinking about me, the world revolves around me. A lot less narcissism, which basically means they can have better relationships with people, with other kids. And the other thing is, that they can finally reconnect with the adult culture. 17, 18-year-old kids love to have counseling. They love to have someone that they can come and talk to, that listens to them. They will acknowledge that maybe there's some things that you know that they don't. They're really easy to work with if they're on task developmentally. Very easy to work with. You know, love to do individual counseling. And they'll do group too, but group's not quite as important to them because while they want peers and while they want friends, they settle for a smaller group of friends. They settle for a better group of friends. They don't have to have 1 million friends. When they're younger, especially 15 and 16, their self-esteem kind of depends on how many friends they have. When they're 17 or 18, 19, they can say, it's more important to have a couple of real good friends as opposed to having just 1 million friends who don't really care about you one way or the other. So those are all the things that happen. Now, see, now they're starting to look like real people that we can understand. Now they start to have a little more in common with us, and now they kind of want to reinvest. This is also the point where kids start really wanting to have a role to play, which brings us time to the next thing, which is emotional development.